Hi, and welcome to the Selected Tech podcast, brought to you by a group of 4 MVPs doing webinars, sessions, and interviews on all things SharePoint, Office 365, and the Microsoft AI ecosystem. Their motto is learn, share, reuse. And here they are, Albert Jan, Rick, Stefan, and Tommy.
Hi everyone. Evening for us, it's evening, maybe for you it's morning. This is another episode of Selected Tech. We're back here with Tommy, Appie, Stefan, and me. And today we're going to talk about working with Microsoft Search. Now it's Microsoft Search. There's a lot of search systems out there. The old SharePoint Search. There's the Azure Cognitive Search. And this one is another one, the Microsoft Search. So Appie, please tell us what the Microsoft Search is and how we can configure it.
Yeah, so, what is the Microsoft Search? I'm not sure if I fully understand what it is, but basically it's a new search experience within Microsoft 365. And you'll probably seen the top bar where throughout the whole Microsoft 365 stack, you now have the option to search. There have been quite a few blog posts around it. And what I wanted to do today is I just want to walk you through what the options are if you actually want to extend that. So if you look at my tenant, it's a demo tenant. I'm searching for the word test, and what I see is that I actually have some options here that won't be there out of the box. So I could flick to Portiva, showing me content from our corporate website. And as you can see, it takes a second to load, but what it will show you is content from our public website. So if I would click that, this will actually bring me to that public website. So this is anonymous content showing up in my Microsoft Search. But I also have the vertical called knowledge. So that knowledge one, that's actually pretty much the same as the Portiva one. It's showing content. However, this content is actually security trimmed. So not everyone will be able to see that. Because if I would copy this link, if I would open this link, what you actually see happening is that it will go, or it will redirect me to an Azure website, and that Azure website is secured. So if you would try this URL, and as you can see, it quickly went through the login screen. I'm already logged in, so there's no need for me to sign in again. But as you can see, even though the content will be shown in the search, you can still security trim it. Now, as you can see, it's just out-of-the-box content. And within this session, what we want to do is we wanted you to walk through the options and what you should do or what you must do to set this up. Now, if you want to play around with the Microsoft Search, all you need to do is you need to go to the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. And in the Admin Center, under the option Settings, you do have the option to click on Search and Intelligence. And if you go to Search and Intelligence, you actually enter the Microsoft Search page where you can see all settings, all configuration around that Microsoft Search. Now, we're not going to do anything with insights and answers right now. We're going to have a look to the connectors, because connectors is where you actually will go if you want to add or change existing connectors. Now, out of the box, you won't have any connectors. I already created 2. As you can see, Wiki and Portiva. Those are the two, the resources, the connectors that actually get the content that I'm looking for. Now, if you create a new one, you have several options, but quickly have a look at the first one. For anonymous websites, it's pretty straightforward. All you need to do is you'll need to provide the actual URL that it will crawl. So you'll have to specify a name and a connection ID. Then if you go to the connection settings, out of the box, you can just say, hey, the URL is just a URL. There's no authentication type. And what this does is it just crawls a public site. There won't be any authorization headers. What I can still do is I can exclude some content. So what I could do is I could say there is part of that website that I want to exclude, any admin pages or login pages that you might have. And then based on that page, or based on the content that it will crawl, you will have the option to work a bit with the schema. There are not that many options that you can do there, but you can say, hey, the content description, keywords, title, and URL. You can specify whether you can query, search, or retrieve those. You can only specify them if you're setting up a new connector. If you edit a existing connector, you can't change them anymore. But usually the out of the box are pretty good enough to start with. And then you have search permissions, so you could work with specific target audiences where you say not everyone should be able to see that content. And you would have the option to specify the refresh interval, which the bare minimum is to 1 day, and then you can scale up to once every 4 weeks, and then you can just say next, and then you're good. So what this does is, if I would save this, this would start crawling our public website every single day. Now, which is all fun. As you could see, there was some content, but what's more interesting is where you actually want to work with authenticated content. So if you want to work with authenticated content, there are some other steps you'll need to take. 1 second to load. So what we did with the wiki, and there's not that much content in there, but we did play around with it a bit. So if I would go there, I can click on the edit. You'll see that it's pretty much the same interface because it's a website that we're connecting to as well. The only difference is that we specified an Azure website URL, and then we said, hey, I'm going to work with the OAuth 2 client credentials. So what you'll need to do if you work with the OAuth client credentials, you'll need to get the resource ID, you'll need to get the client ID, and you'll need to get a client secret. So what we did is, if you go to that let me go to this one. If I go to my resource groups, what I did is I created a demo environment. So I created that Azure site. So let me quickly figure out what resource group I put it in. Can't remember, so I'm going to go to home, look at all my resources. Take a second to load.
Finding stuff in the Azure portal.
Yeah, I've got way too many. Let me search it like this. It should come up with the web app that I'm looking. There we go. So that app service is configured to make sure that anyone who would go to that app service actually is required to authenticate. So that would be step one. You would have your app service and you would define that that app service is required to be authenticated against. Now, I have no clue why it's loading that slowly. Usually it's a bit quicker.
No, it's the same today. It was the same. The portal was slow today.
I don't know why. Sometimes it's just bad luck. So what we did is we said on the authentication and authorization tab within my app service, or within the app service, we said, okay, app service authentication is on, log in with the Azure Active Directory, and we configured the Express with an existing app. Basically, to just specify the Azure AD app that it is required to authenticate against. Now, that would be step one. That means that if I go to this URL, I always need to log in with an existing Azure Active Directory account. If I don't have that account, I'm not allowed to sign in. So if I would open this URL in an in-private browser, it won't work. Now, the second thing is, what you then need to do is you then need to specify that that application actually has a client ID and a client secret. So if I go to this specific application, what I can do is I can go to my certificates and secrets. Again, fairly slow. And as you can see here, I generated some passwords or some client secrets. So those are, or one of these is actually required to have. So you will need to have at least one client secret. And if I go to my overview, because it's an existing application, it will have that application ID. This will already be present. So what you then can do is you can go to, there was this one. So you have a resource ID, and the resource ID is actually the URL of your application. So in this case, what we used is the application ID URI, which is this URL. So you can copy this one. Copy.
Just the website. Okay.
Yeah, put it in there, and you can play around, try different ones, but you'll definitely need the application ID URI, and that can be a URL. It must be a valid URL, otherwise the search won't pick it up. Then you will have the client ID, and I'm going to pick that one. Client ID, application ID, paste it in there, and then I already had the client secret somewhere else. So I'm put it in there. Don't worry, I will reset the client ID once I'm done. And then you can do test connection. Now, the first time that you actually test it, it probably won't work because there's one thing that wasn't really clear in the documentation from my side. It's working on my application, but that is because I already changed some things in my application. What you'll need to do is, if I go to my manifest, you can also go to the branding page, but I find the manifest slightly easier to read. But what you will need to do is you will need to have at least one reply URL, and that reply URL should contain this URL. This is basically the search engine reply URL. If this URL is not there, then the search indexer is not able to authenticate with the client ID and the client secret. So even though it has that client ID and client secret, without that reply URL, it will just tell you, hey, I'm not allowed to sign in, and you get a weird error saying, hey, I ain't working for you, nothing happening, and then you're kind of screwed. Now, if this is all there, then you can just look through everything. You can still do the exclude URL. You can still manage the schema if you're creating a new one. And once you're done, once you click on save and close, I'm going to move out of it. I'm not going to save anything. But if you move out of it, then it will start crawling, and it will get a connection state saying crawling. It takes some time to actually populate everything depending on how many items there are. So in my wiki test case, I had like 40 items in the index that took, I don't know, 2 minutes. The website actually has 1,000 items that took a few more minutes to actually populate. Now that you have that connector finished, that means that all the content is there and you can start working with that.
And do you know, does it like a public website with like Google indexes it with robots.txt or what's all that stuff in public websites? Does it use this one as well?
There is no official documentation on what it uses, but it looks like it's still using the robots.txt. So it adheres to some of the best practice around crawling. That makes sense. But as you can imagine, because it's Microsoft Search, you can do other things as well. So if I go to the ad, you will see that there are different data sources. I could get stuff from blob storage, or I can get stuff from Azure SQL, or I can get stuff from a file share or Azure DevOps. So getting content is not only the enterprise websites. You can, but there are other options as well. Now, if that content is in there, then nothing else is happening. So the content is available, but it won't show up anywhere. And that's actually the next step. So the first step, connectors, is just adding content to your index, but it won't show up in your search. The next step, what you'll need to do is you'll need to define result types and verticals. Verticals is what will show up in your search center. So that's what an end user would see, and the result types is the layout that will be used. So the cards, and the result types look like adaptive cards. So if I would pick the wiki article, what you will see is that there is some documentation around it as well. You have a name, you map it to the content source, and the content source is actually the connector that you're using. So you have two connectors in my case, Wiki and Portiva. And then what you can do is you can specify some rules. So you could say, maybe if the title contains a specific word, or if the URL is a specific regex, then I want a different layout so that you can differentiate between different looks or different adaptive cards depending on the content that you have. In my case, I just said, okay, I'm not going to use any rules. I'm always going to use the same result type, the same layout for this wiki article. And then if you go to the layout, then you actually get a layout designer, which is a different URL. It's an Azure website where you can specify how things should look. And for those already played around with adaptive cards, it's pretty much a similar experience where you just have JSON that contains the markup and the layout of your card. So if you go to the layout designer, what you get is you get a basic design that you can pick. So you could say, hey, I want to have something that looks like this, or maybe I want to have that image as well, or maybe I don't want to have an image. So I'm going to start with that. Then from there, you can just change the thing. So what you'll need to do is you'll need to specify the property. You can add a sample value to see how it would look. And then in our case, so let's say I want to have a title. You can see that in here. Basically, what we'll do here, this is a sample as well, but here you can see that you can paste in that content, and then you can see, okay, you have the curly braces title, you have the curly braces URL. So that are all the indexed properties coming from your index that you can add in here. And if you scroll down a bit, here you can see all the different properties that you have for this content source. So here I could use URL, title, description, keywords, and result snippet, which are out of the box available. And then you can tweak it. You could say, hey, maybe I want to use a different image, different icon, stuff like that. Then once you're done, so let's say I'm going to add title, it's required. Let's do URL in here, and let's do modified by. Let's do title as well, because I know that that property, and this is required as well. Let's put in the description is also required. Let me pick result snippet, put it in there, and then what you can do is generate and copy JSON. Then you've got your JSON and you can paste it in here. And then apparently I'm using a invalid property. Okay, yeah, I did that wrong the last time as well. So in here, you don't have to specify the curly braces. It will generate those for you.
Okay,
Sorry about that.
Pretty clear from the.
Yeah. In one of the first versions, you had to add them, and then in a later version, no longer. So let's do it like that.
Why does this eagerly? It reminds me of the SharePoint servers in the beginning. You remember?
Oh,
No,
yes.
it's just JavaScript. Yeah, it's just displayed, and then it's also
Modifying search results. Yeah.
Still doing something wrong, so I'm just going to go back and do next. So it retrieves the old one. Or not. Too bad. I'm not going to not save, remove. Let me click edit again. Always a bit risky to change stuff like that. Then finally, if you're done, takes a few more seconds to load again. Then you can just say, hey, review, this is the results. Are you still happy with that? You can save and close. I didn't change anything now, so it won't allow me to update. But if you have those result types available, then you can actually create your verticals, and the verticals is what an end user will see. So if I go to verticals, you will see that I did create a Portiva vertical, and as you remembered, I had a wiki connector, but for the wiki connector, I created a knowledge vertical because, well, wiki didn't sound really fancy as a vertical, so I decided to give it a slightly different name. If it allows me to load stuff. No clue why it's...
If you change the result type, is it instant? Because I'm thinking about, okay, I need to change something for a customer or for somebody, for my company. And then, okay, I need to change the result type and then save it, look at it, save it again.
Yeah, the changes in the cards were near instantly for me. I can imagine that they might be cached on the back side of things, but on my side, the last few times, they were like, I changed it, and 1 minute later, it was there. So here you can see that you can create those verticals, and if you pick a vertical, there's nothing fancy about it other than you can create a vertical and disable it. So it's not available yet. Basically, it's a name, it's a content source, and it's a query. So you give it a name, that's what an end user will see. You hook it up to a content source, so it has to be available. And then finally, you can say, hey, maybe in this specific vertical, I want to filter out or get a subset of the data in this vertical, and you can add your own keyword query language queries into there. Queryable properties. In this demo, we just did queries and title. So I could say maybe I want to, I don't know, get or exclude specific content from the title, and I can just write that. There is this nice article that explains everything, explains everything. It's the basics into the KQL syntax. It's pretty straightforward if you work with SharePoint search, I would say.
Yeah. Been there for
And
a
that are
long time.
basically all the steps. Now, the only thing is that once you publish your vertical, that will take some time to get to your end users. When I published mine, it took, I don't know, 25 minutes before it would show up in the Microsoft search. And that isn't really a problem unless you were like, oh, let's do a quick demo and here you can see the results. And I was like, hey, it's not showing. Now I'm slightly confused. So keep in mind that if you publish this, that it will take maybe an hour or so to get to your end users.
Cool.
Questions?
So it's like the old timer jobs in the background
Yeah.
that we all used to.
Probably
click
some
through.
caching somewhere that will take some time.
The only thing I hate about it is it's directly in the admin center of, only. Yeah. Let's say you have to change something. Not everybody has access to this admin, especially not those settings, because it's like, they're alongside the domain settings and the organizational settings.
Yeah.
Many companies try to shield that from everyone.
Yeah, I can imagine that there will be a new administrator role or an extended administrator role where you could be something like a search administrator, because if you go here, you see things around insights, around answers. So it might make sense that there will be more of a Microsoft Search administrator flag that you can assign to administrators, but currently not. The other thing that I'm slightly worried about is that you're allowed 2,500 items in your index. That is not necessarily enough for a enterprise. And as you can see, I did 2 demos and I'm already almost at 50% of what I'm allowed to. And there's no, at least I'm not aware of anything around allowing you to buy extra indexing power or something like that.
That will come. No, that will come.
Yeah, probably that will come. It makes sense that would come.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the back end of this will probably just be Azure, no? They will store it in Azure and it will just be something.
Honestly, I don't know. It make sense that it would be in some sort of Azure indexer, but given the fact that I can do add and see things like Azure SQL, blob storage, they might require to do some fancy stuff to get it correctly into Azure Search, but
how about the results? Do they also, can you query them from your Windows search as well? Because some of the Microsoft Search stuff is also available on Windows.
Yeah, so the Microsoft Search stuff is available on Windows, and my demo machine is not hooked up correctly to show that actually in Windows, but they should show up.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Did you already see anything of like the configuration that you clicked now as, or you clicked as now through, any way of exporting or importing that?
No, I haven't seen anything around that.
Search configuration, because like you're doing this now on your production tenant or in a dev tenant, and then you move it around. So
Yes. So there is no way of exporting. So I can delete and I can pass, and that's basically it. I can imagine, like all things, that in the fullness of time, you'll probably get APIs or an export option to export this content.
Yeah, because you didn't have to configure that much, so it would be easy to put it all in a JSON file or in a other one.
Yeah. I also haven't played around
whole search settings on a farm on-prem, so should be doable. Or
I also haven't played around with the Azure CLI yet, because maybe if you play around with the CLI, you can find, I don't know, a hidden index or a hidden instance somewhere that you can read.
Because that would be interesting to redeploy your setting to a new tenant or a new environment.
Yeah, because like I said, an admin is not gonna allow you to play around with this, so they want to see it, and then give me.
Yeah, in half a year there is a Microsoft CLI command for that.
Probably.
Yeah.
And then don't
Yeah,
build
that
the
makes
import.
sense. Makes sense.
Build the export command only, not the import command.
And in terms of if you can go back or create a new one, I saw that the authentication thingy, this was a drop down. There were other options as well. You went for the
Yeah. So
flow?
yeah. So if you pick an enterprise website, wait, let me do that. Let's do test, and this one. Loading. Yeah, there we go. So you've got none, basic, and OAuth. And basic is username, password.
That's what
I wouldn't recommend doing that, but yeah, it will work.
Yeah, if your web page does basic authentication,
yeah.
What other options do you have? Yeah.
True. But I like the fact it was fiddling a bit around with the OAuth, but that's probably because authentication is hard. But once you understand, if you understand this from a REST perspective, where you build your own REST queries, then the only thing that took me some time to figure out was to get the correct resource ID, because I was playing around. If I go to my overview, I was thinking, hey, maybe, okay, I do have a client ID, but then what is the thing that I need? And I was thinking, hey, I need the object ID. So I pasted this in for like, I don't know, 15 different apps. And I was like, hey, it's not working. And then all of a sudden I was like, yeah, but maybe they're using some other thing. And I fiddled around with it. And then I was like, okay, resource ID, that might be the same as application ID, URI, which was like a guess, but it worked.
Okay.
Yeah, what would be interesting to see is when you showed us the Azure AD application and you went for Azure Active Directory, but you could also authenticate against Facebook, for example. So if your AD app, it's more like the search uses your Azure AD application, and whatever you configure there then should be reachable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, your own API, Facebook, whatever you want. I'm looking at the licensing prices. So apparently it has to do with your licensing, how many quota you got.
Oh,
you only get it if you have E5 licenses.
Yeah, I've got an E5 license. I've got like 5 E5 licenses.
Yeah, and then it's 100 times if you so it's per license you get 500 items in your index.
Okay. Yeah.
And there's a limit of 7 million items. But then you have to contact your Microsoft account manager. But I guess if you have 7 million items, so that's a lot of E5 licenses. So
that's what's called a soft limit, right?
Yeah. Well, from our perspective, we've been doing some migrations, and we migrated to blob storage, where it actually, so it's archived data, but with the Gen 2, you can actually expose that archived data into your search. So you could say, hey, even though we archived all that old crap into blob storage and it will probably be deleted at some point in time, we could still expose it into the search, because even though it's archived data, it might be relevant for whatever you're doing right now. And then if you have like, I don't know, 8 terabytes of archived data in blob somewhere, which is a cheap option, you might have a easy way to expose that, though then you will have that indexing issue.
Too bad, only E5. Not everyone has E5, of course. Too bad.
Great upsell opportunity.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's true.
But I'm not in the licensing business.
No, me neither. I'm just happy that I have a demo tenant with some E5 licenses.
Yeah, me as well. Yeah, of course.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm waiting until. I'm also reading something about that even custom third-party connectors will someday be able to be created. So.
That's probably the next interesting thing, right? Having the option to write your own connector, or even going as far as exposing your Azure Search indexer as a connector in here.
Yeah, they're already building connectors by our partners: Adobe, Amazon, Atlassian, Box.
Yeah, well, Atlassian exposing tickets like ServiceNow is doing to search in the Microsoft search through all the tickets that are there, and then have things like searching from Windows or searching from your portal definitely makes sense.
Workplace by Facebook connector. That's even freakier.
Yeah, of course.
There's a lot of them. Google Drive,
there.
IBM. But they're all from
Atlassian is
almost
all
the
the
same.
Confluence stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
They're all from the same company. It looks like it. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of them.
Cool. Guess that's it for this week then.
Yeah.
Perfect. Many thanks.
Cool.
Thanks
Yeah.
a lot.
Thanks.
Cool,
Very
thank you.
clarifying. Yeah, and I need to use this.
Yeah,
Especially
definitely
for
something that we as a company are looking into because, well,
Yeah, it's easy. It's there. It's easy for a company just to index their public site. I would start there. For every company, just you have your public site, index it, and it's in SharePoint. There you go. Or in Microsoft 365.
we have a Yugo website internally, which contains our best practices around deployment to Azure, deployment to M365. So some of our, best practices, and we put it all in Markdown, generated with Yugo. We put it on an Azure website, and we use this to expose that data into search. We also have been looking at what Alio has built, what is it called? The doctor stuff. We played around with that as well, because then you can expose it in SharePoint. But currently we use a Azure website, host static content, have authentication on it, and use the search to expose the data.
Quite cool.
Yeah.
Okay,
Cool stuff.
then with that, thank you for today and see you next time.
See you next time.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to check out the show notes at selectedtech.show to get all the mentioned references. And one more thing, please tweet about the podcast and give them a 5-star review. This really helps the guys a lot. Thank you and see you next time. Bye.